Welcome again to the Vantage Performance Podcast. I'm Phil Dobbie, and this is our fourth episode looking at thriving in uncertainty. Now, we've spoken to Michael Fingland, the Vantage Performance CEO, about getting the basics right, the need for a clear strategy when you're launching a turnaround, and how to manage your capital effectively. Now, of course, historically, capital was all about equipment or things, not living, breathing human beings. But I guess, Michael, in reality, in many cases, it's the most important part of capital you have in your business.
Yeah, they certainly are, Phil. Staff are critical with every business, but particularly during a period of crisis or underperformance or even a turnaround phase.
Harder to manage the machines, of course. I mean, machines are far more predictable. I guess that is the issue. You've got to understand how to, because you're dealing with, a very diverse group of people normally, and trying to bring them all together, I guess, is the biggest challenge.
It is, and at the end of the day, every staff member has a very simple desire with work. One is to enjoy and get along with your colleagues, etc. But they all have a fundamental concern about job security.
Yeah.
So communication, we've talked about that in the past, but particularly during a period of uncertainty with a business, communication has to be ramped up and be clearer, concise, and you need to include staff in what's going on.
What happens? What happens if you've got detractors, though? People who sort of like are not getting with the program. Do you try and turn them around, or do you just block them out?
Two ways to answer that, or two parts to that question. First is there are detractors that you can't turn around. And they are people who, no matter what you try and do, you will waste your energy on them trying to get them to be supportive of the business. So really it's about encouraging them to work out, do they really want to be here or not, and encouraging them to move on if this is not a business that they are genuinely wanting to support.
Right.
But there are a lot of people who may appear as detractors, but they're just nervous and they're making noise because they're uncertain, and that's where a well-developed and timely executed communication plan will turn those nervous people into supporters.
I'm wondering, is there a third type where they actually might have a point? They might be saying, "Oh, look, it's not going to work this way. Listen to me because I've got a better idea."
Yeah, the best advice you can give a management team when they're about to embark upon some major restructuring, whether it's looking at their manufacturing operations, their supply chain, whole of business brand, incorporate your staff, do some staff surveys, set up a staff committee, an employee committee to really understand what's going on in the business and use that as a vehicle to actually get some good ideas and thoughts from the workforce, because in 20 years of doing this, some of the best initiatives have actually come from the floor.
Right. Okay. So some of those detractors, if you got to them early, they might be the reason for them being a detractor might have been because they just feel like they weren't being listened to in the first place. So if you address that, then that issue goes away, I guess. And
definitely.
And then you talk about a communication plan. So is that sort of like saying, well, this is where we're going, this is why we're going, and then does it get down to defining roles as well? Because I guess people's functions in the organisation. You're talking about something which is fairly short term. So jobs are going to change for a little while, aren't they?
They may do, but quite often we come into situations where clear roles, responsibilities are not clear across the organisation. So there needs to be a piece of work done to get that clarity and communicate that across the team. That's often very critical.
And the idea of having some sort of incentives as well, because, I mean, this might be a period of time where everyone's got to work that little bit harder to try and get over the hump, and some sort of reward, I guess, makes sense. To
a degree, and every job's different. I mean, part of the communication plan is really understanding the issues that the business is facing, what the plans are to address it, the role that the staff can play in being part of the strategy formulation, or at least in the execution phase, and showing that the staff actually have a critical part to play in successfully navigating the business through. And often what we find is monetary rewards are actually not what they're after. They just want to be included and have a part to play, and they will work their ears off to deliver a better outcome. Because at the end of the day, in most businesses, they love being there. They just want to feel that they can contribute, and often they can contribute significantly if they're given the encouragement and the scope and the space. But on occasion, you may look at a a broader reward system, and every industry and every type of business is different, so you need to tailor it to the situation. But sometimes, there are other rewards that are much more powerful than monetary rewards.
So you talked about uncertainty and the nasty word restructure, which gets used in circumstances like this. Everyone thinks, oh my goodness, there's a restructure going on, and often that's getting rid of layers within an organisation. That's the sort of thing that does make people nervous, doesn't it? Because they read restructure, they think massive layoffs.
It does, but the critical part to any headcount restructure is not to do 3 or 4 rounds. Try and do 1, 2 at the most. Yeah. But the biggest mistake management teams make is they do one, then do another one, and realise they didn't cut far enough, so they do another one. And redundancies, in our view, are always the last resort. You should look at 4-day work weeks, 9-day fortnights, other ways to reduce. And
retraining, I guess, as well.
Retraining and redeploying people into other areas of the business.
Listen, my brother in the UK, he's working a 9-day fortnight. It was his company brought it on because of the global financial crisis. They haven't, I guess the crisis is still going on, so everyone's still on 9-day fortnights. He absolutely loves it, and he's actually, was happy to take the pay cut to get, to have a little less stress in his life.
Exactly, and it actually turns into a benefit, not a burden. And as you say, it can be difficult to wean them back into a full-time, a 10-day fortnight. But looking at those sort of initiatives before going to complete headcount reduction initiatives, and sometimes you might have outsourced a key part of your business in years gone by, and actually bringing that function back in-house might prevent you from making redundancies in the business, which obviously has a cultural impact as well.
Yeah, I talked about getting rid of layers within an organisation. I think that's often the case, isn't it? That companies have grown over time and they've got sort of many tiers of management, and I know often that's the case as part of a restructure. Is how can we flatten the company? I remember when I was very young, talking to my father in one of my early jobs and saying, "Hey, look, I'm 4th from the top in this organisation," and my dad said, well, in most sensible organisations, if you're 4th from the top, you should be cleaning the toilets. So I mean, it really is a case, isn't it, that you can have too much of a hierarchy, but I guess it's that is a massive organisational undertaking to try and get rid of a layer within an organisation, because you're redefining so many roles.
It can be, but often there are so many other benefits to delayering. I mean, we're talking about here where there's unnecessary layers. Yeah. And often you have a situation where there's unnecessary layers that have been put in place in years gone by because people are empire building, and that actually ends up in a situation where communication then is much harder to get across the group. So by delayering an organisation, yes, it takes some careful planning and management, but you have a much easier pathway then to get the communication plan working, because you've got less layers and less filters between the CEO and the ground floor.
Right. So some of this is relatively easy, but when you start looking at, not trying to denigrate the work you do, but when you look at the culture word, trying to change the culture of an organisation, I mean, that is hard, isn't it? Because that's very often that's the intrinsic thing that caused the problem in the first place.
It can be, and usually you can draw a line back to 3 or 4 years ago, before the ROTZN, that there were some decisions taken or policies made that started impacting on culture. So you need to go back to root cause, understand what was really driving the changes in behaviour that have turned up in terms of low productivity and high staff turnover, things like that, and then start developing strategies to address that root cause. It's not a quick fix. Changing cultures in organisations can take 1 to 2 years, but you do go through phases of significant change and significant improvement, and it's important that you keep building on that momentum. And as I said, it's not a quick fix, but you need to have a culture transformation plan in place for most turnarounds or restructures, to make sure that motivation continues all the way through.
And how does that manifest itself? Because the people who are working for the company, I mean, they're not going to change. I mean, you are who you are. So and you presumably want to keep most of them in the organisation. So if they're not changing, how is the organisation changing? How is it manifesting itself?
Yeah, well, the critical bit is to understand why they're frustrated. Because the culture in any organisation is low because they're frustrated. And it's because they don't know their place in the business. It's because they don't get any communication. It might be because they're significantly unhappy with some decisions that were taken by management that might have been, they might have had merit, but because they were poorly communicated, the staff took the message the wrong way and thought they were being punished. So, in our experience, as long as you have a clearly communicated strategy for the business, and then that is cascaded down into the business as to what it means for the staff members, involve them in the process so they can genuinely feel that they can make a difference.
Yeah.
And that's what most staff want to do. They want to make a difference. They don't just want to turn up to work for 8 hours a day and just punch out items on a manufacturing line. They actually want to make a difference.
Yeah.
So the key to any cultural transformation project is identifying how the staff can make a difference, encouraging them to make a difference, and don't make it artificial.
Right.
Make it genuine, and often setting up, as I said before, an employee consultative committee is a key demonstrator of management's willingness to actually let staff have a role to play. And those management teams that do end up with a much stronger culture, a much more inclusive workforce, and therefore a more productive one.
Yeah, they're going to work their derriere off, I believe, is the expression you used earlier on. So, who's going to drive this activity then? The actual program of activity. Does this fall into? Is this driven by the HR team? I don't want to be dismissive of HR teams, but many organisations, they may actually have been the root cause of the problem. So, how do you choose where in the organisation the responsibility to fix all this sits?
It needs to be driven from the CEO.
Right.
The CEO has to be seen to take ownership of this, and to be incredibly important for him or her. Now, the HR manager, director, or even a specialist consultant that might come in and help them devise a cultural transformation project, they are all tools. But the CEO has to be the face of it, and has to be seen to be the driver of it. Otherwise, the staff will just see it as another HR initiative that won't go anywhere because it's not supported from the top. So it has to be led from the top, and communicated from the top.
Right. Wise words as always, Michael Fingland. Appreciate the time. Thanks for talking to us today.
Yes, Phil.